My name is Daniel Harper. I'm 34 years old, a documentary photographer, and I've seen some strange things in countries that prefer to bury their wounds under centuries of stone and polite smiles. But nothing, absolutely nothing, compares to what I experienced in that forgotten village at the foot of Montserrat. It was supposed to be just another project, something simple, a photo series on ancient monasteries, regional traditions, and Gothic architecture deep in the interior of Europe. My destination? A village called Sant Fosc, tucked into the side of the Montserrat Mountains in Spain. I hadn't even heard of it until I stumbled across its name on a blog about obscure historical sites. Too small for tourist maps, too old for Google Street View. Naturally, that only made me more curious. I arrived late in the afternoon under a sky thick with clouds, the kind that seemed to sit just above the treetops. I drove a rented car along winding roads that wrapped around the hills like fading ribbons. As I climbed higher, cell service dropped to 0, and the silence became heavier, not peaceful, but dense, as if the very air was holding its breath. No other cars, no signs of life, just the road, the mist, and that odd sensation that someone or something was watching. The village appeared suddenly, as if it had been painted into the landscape while I blinked. Stone houses with red-tiled roofs, dark wooden shutters closed even though it was still daylight, and narrow streets paved in uneven cobblestone. It looked frozen in time, but not in a charming postcard kind of way. There was something off. The air itself felt old, tired, like it carried too many secrets. I parked in front of the house I had rented for 3 weeks, an old stone building I booked through a vacation rental app. The place looked sturdy, with thick gray walls covered in moss. A twisted tree grew on the side, its branches brushing against the roof like fingers reaching for something lost. I found the key hidden under a loose stone, just like the owner had instructed through the app. Oddly, he hadn't replied to any of my messages since confirming the booking. Inside, the house smelled like old wood and damp stone, nostalgic and unsettling all at once. Dust coated the surfaces, but everything was in working order. A simple bed, a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, and curiously, a heavy wooden door in the floor, secured with rusted chains. A basement. There had been no mention of that in the listing. I didn't open it. Not that night. Tired and a bit carsick, I made something light to eat, checked my cameras, and lay down with an old book I brought on the history of Montserrat. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up for no reason. The silence was so absolute I could hear my own heartbeat. Then I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, downstairs. I froze, trying to rationalize. Maybe an animal, maybe the house settling, wood creaks, right? But these weren't random creaks. These were rhythmic, human. I grabbed my phone. No signal, of course. I slipped on a jacket and crept downstairs with the flashlight on. Everything was exactly as I had left it, nothing out of place. But then I saw it. The basement door was ajar. The chains that had sealed it were lying on the floor like dead snakes. I didn't go down there. I couldn't. I closed the door, wrapped the chains back on as best I could, and pushed a heavy cabinet in front of it. Then I returned to my room and stayed up until the gray light of morning bled through the blinds. The sun did nothing to make me feel safer. That day, I wandered through the village with my camera slung around my neck. I tried to capture the details, the cracked religious tiles on door frames, the withered flowers in clay pots, strange symbols carved into lintels. The few people I saw didn't smile. They didn't even nod, just stared as I passed, like they were waiting for something. In the central square, I found an elderly woman sitting on a stone bench feeding pigeons. The pigeons fluttered nervously, never settling for long. I greeted her in Spanish and asked her if she knew anything about the village's history. She didn't answer first, just looked up at me with pale, watery eyes and said, "The living here live in silence. The dead do not." I almost laughed, or chalked it up to local superstition, but the way she said it, the tremble in her voice, the weariness in her gaze, didn't feel theatrical. It felt like a warning. I went back to the house with more questions than photographs. That night, a storm rolled in. Not rain, rage, the kind of wind that bends trees and slams shutters. The power flickered every few minutes, and I sat at the kitchen table reviewing images on my laptop. That's when I heard it again. Footsteps. Not downstairs this time. Above me. But the house had no second floor. I climbed cautiously, heart hammering, and found nothing. Just the ceiling above the living room. No attic, no staircase, no hatch. Just a stain, circular, dark, and slowly spreading, directly above where I'd been sitting, like something had been standing up there, dripping. The next morning, I received an automated email from Airbnb. "We hope you're enjoying your stay in Saint Fosque. If you need anything, reach out to your host, Lucia Ferrer." Lucia Ferrer. The name sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it. I opened the app to look at her profile, but it had been deactivated 3 years ago. I spent the rest of the morning trying to convince myself I was just tired. Jet lag, isolation, too many hours editing photos, too little sleep. I'd dealt with this kind of mental fog before on solo trips, but something about this felt different, more personal, like the house was reacting to me. I made a strong pot of coffee and sat outside for a while, hoping the fresh mountain air would help. From the small stone patio, I could see the jagged peaks of Montserrat rising in the distance, sharp and unnatural, like broken teeth jutting from the earth. The clouds never really lifted. They just drifted slowly, heavy and gray, like they were waiting for something. Around midday, I returned to the house and stood staring at the basement door. It hadn't moved. The chains were still there, the cabinet still in place, but I swear I could hear something. Not loud, barely audible. A kind of humming? Like wind passing through a narrow tunnel, but deeper, like it was coming from under the floor. I shook it off and tried to focus. I had come here to work, not to lose my mind. I packed up my camera gear and took the trail that led out of the village toward the eastern ridge. I'd seen an old stone cross there the day before, something that might look good framed against the cliffs. The trail was overgrown, and the silence along the path felt unnatural. No birds, no insects, not even the sound of branches moving in the wind, just the crunch of my boots against dry leaves and gravel. When I reached the cross, I stopped. It was taller than I expected, nearly 10 feet, weathered and cracked, with what looked like scorch marks running down its base. At its foot were melted candles, burned photos, and bones. Small ones. Maybe animal, maybe not. Someone had scratched words into the base in Catalan. I didn't recognize all of it, but I understood just enough to feel a chill. She watches. Do not answer the knock. That was it. I took 2 photos and left. When I got back to the village, the sky was already dimming, and I realized I hadn't seen a single other person the entire afternoon. Stores were closed, windows were shuttered. It was like the whole village was holding its breath. Back at the house, I went straight to the front door and twisted the lock. I shut every window tight, turned on every light, and lit a fire in the old stone hearth, even though it wasn't particularly cold. Something about the flickering light made me feel slightly safer, like I could see whatever might try to creep out of the corners. I uploaded the day's photos, but my focus kept drifting. Every creak of the floor, every gust of wind outside. My nerves were fraying, strand by strand. At 9:46 p.m., there was a knock. 3 slow, heavy thuds against the wooden front door. I froze. My first instinct was that it was a villager, maybe someone checking on me. But then I remembered what I'd read at the base of the cross. Do not answer the knock. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Another knock, slower this time. And then, silence. I waited for nearly an hour before creeping over to the door and looking through the tiny peephole. Nothing. Just fog and darkness. That night, I kept all the lights on. I slept in short bursts, waking at every sound. Just after 2 a.m., I heard whispering. Not in the house, not outside, inside the walls, like someone was pressing their lips directly against the stone and murmuring just below the threshold of understanding. The worst part was, it almost sounded familiar, like a lullaby I hadn't heard since childhood. The next morning, I searched the house again, this time with purpose. In the back corner of the living room, behind an old bookshelf, I found something strange, a narrow seam in the wall. Not a crack, a perfectly straight line, maybe 5 feet tall. I pushed, and the wall gave way, swinging open on hidden hinges with a soft groan. Behind it, a hidden closet, dusty, cold. Inside there were 3 things: a worn leather suitcase, an old reel-to-reel tape recorder, and a stack of black and white photographs, yellowed with age. I pulled the photos out first. They were of the village, same streets, same houses, but older. Some were from the 1930s, judging by the cars and clothing. In a few, I recognized the house I was staying in, including one photo of the front porch where a woman in a nurse's uniform stood, half turned toward the camera, face blurred from motion. Someone had written Lucia Ferrer on the back. The suitcase held more photographs, documents, and a few small items: a rosary, a child's hair ribbon, and a military badge from the Spanish Civil War. The documents were in Spanish and Catalan, but I could make out enough to guess Lucia had lived here during the war, maybe worked in the monastery as a nurse. One paper had a red cross stamped on it and the words, "No abrir la puerta de la piedra, bajo ninguna circunstancia." Do not open the stone door, under no circumstances. Finally, I turned to the tape recorder. I didn't expect it to work, but when I plugged it in, it clicked to life. A faint hiss filled the room. Then, a woman's voice, shaky, tired, speaking Spanish softly, like she was afraid of being overheard. She said her name, Lucia Ferrer. She spoke about patients who disappeared in the night, about nuns who no longer blinked, about a stone door beneath the monastery that leads nowhere and everywhere. And then she said something that made me feel like the ground shifted beneath me. If someone finds this, please don't trust the priest. He serves the stone. He always has. The recording ended in static. I sat there for a long time, staring at the photos, the documents, the blinking light on the recorder. Outside, the wind began to howl again. That was the night I stopped thinking I was alone in that house.
The next morning, the village was silent again. I woke up groggy, surrounded by the old photos and documents I'd spread across the floor during the night. The suitcase sat open like a mouth gasping for breath, and the recorder was still humming, the static now almost comforting. It was the only sound in the room, aside from my own heartbeat. I needed answers. Real ones. Not whispers, not dreams. Facts. I took the photo of Lucia Ferrer and walked to the only building that had any sign of life, the church at the edge of the village. Its bell tower loomed over the rooftops like a watchman. The door was slightly ajar when I arrived, the interior lit only by the flickering glow of a dozen prayer candles. There, at the front, standing silently beside the altar, was a man I hadn't seen before. Mid-60s, tall, dressed in simple black. Not quite a cassock, but close. He turned to me as I entered, his eyes pale and glassy, his expression unreadable. "Buenos dias," I said cautiously. "Are you the priest here?" He nodded slowly. "Padre Miguel," he said in a raspy voice. "You must be the foreigner, the one in Lucia's house." The way he said it sent a chill through me. I hadn't told anyone where I was staying. I held up the photograph. "Do you know her, Lucia Ferrer?" His eyes narrowed just slightly. "She died many years ago. I found her things in a hidden room, old tapes, letters, photos. She was troubled, traumatized by war, by the things she saw." I stepped forward. She mentioned a stone door beneath the monastery. She said you... He raised a hand, cutting me off. "There are old stories in this place, dangerous ones. They survive because people keep them buried. You should do the same." There wasn't a warning. It was a command. "I'm not here to stir up trouble," I said carefully. "But I need to understand what's happening in that house, in this village." His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. "There are places in Montserrat that were never meant to be found, doors that were never meant to be opened." I left the church with more questions than answers. As I walked back through the village, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. Symbols carved into the wood above several doors, faint but deliberate, like old runes or protective marks. I hadn't seen them my first day, but now they seemed to be on every other house. A few were freshly carved, the wood still raw. Something was shifting, and it was no longer subtle. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the creaks and moans of the house. Just after midnight, I heard it again. Footsteps in the walls. But this time they didn't pace. They stopped, right outside my bedroom door. I sat up, heart pounding, the blanket tangled around my legs. The doorknob began to turn slowly. I held my breath. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. When I opened the door, the hallway was empty. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. At dawn, I made a decision. I would go to the monastery. Montserrat Monastery was a short drive up the mountain, perched high on the cliffs. It looked majestic from a distance, but as I approached, something about it felt off. Not just old, abandoned. No monks, no pilgrims, no visitors. The main gates were locked, but a side path led around the stone wall to a rusted service door. It was open. Inside, the hallways were cold and damp. Stone corridors stretched in every direction, lined with arched doorways and stained glass windows that filtered in pale, distorted light. I took out my camera, but every photo came out blurry, no matter how steady my hands were. The deeper I went, the stranger it became. In one chamber, I found rows of hospital beds, long unused, rusting in place. Charts still hung at the foot of some. Names, handwritten in ink, mostly dated between 1937 and 1939. I recognized one, Isidro Ferrer. Maybe Lucia's brother? In the far end of the same corridor was a door that looked older than the rest, not part of the monastery's original design. Carved into the stone above it were words in Latin I had to photograph and translate later. Aperire est damnare. To open is to condemn. The door had no handle, no lock, just a large circular indentation in the center, like a seal. As I reached out to touch it, the air shifted, not wind, but pressure. My ears popped, my fingers began to tremble. Then, faintly, from behind the stone, a whisper. I stumbled back and ran. I didn't stop until I was back at the car, soaked in sweat, hands shaking. Something was behind that door, and it knew I was there. That night I reviewed the photos I'd managed to take. Most were still blurry, distorted, or washed out, but one stood out, a shot I had taken of the infirmary wing. In the corner of the frame, reflected in the shattered glass of a cabinet, was a woman in white standing just behind me. Pale face, eyes black and hollow, mouth open in a silent scream. I hadn't seen her when I took the photo, but I recognized her. Lucia Ferrer. Her face matched the photograph from the suitcase. I stared at it for hours, paralyzed. She wasn't trying to haunt me. She was trying to warn me. The knock came again at 3:12 a.m. This time, not at the front door, at the basement door. 3 heavy thuds. Then, silence. I stood frozen in the hallway, staring at the chain door. I could hear breathing on the other side. Slow, wet. Like something not human was mimicking the sound of lungs. And then from behind the wood, a voice. Daniel. I ran. I packed a bag and left the house before sunrise, driving aimlessly down the mountain until I reached a gas station with a weak Wi-Fi signal. I booked a hotel room 2 towns over and told myself I'd sleep, recover, and go home. I had enough to abandon the project. But I couldn't let it go. Because deep down, something in me knew. This wasn't random. There was a reason I found Lucia's house, a reason I heard her voice, a reason my name came from behind a sealed door that no one was supposed to open. Someone had chosen me. And whatever was beneath Montserrat, it was waking up.
I didn't sleep that night, even at the hotel. I sat in the corner of the room with the lights on, gripping my camera like it could protect me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, Lucia, pale and open-mouthed, trapped behind the glass in my photo. Not angry, not vengeful, terrified. By morning, I was no longer just scared. I was obsessed. I spent hours going over every photo, every page of Lucia's journal, every note from the suitcase. One phrase kept coming up, La puerta de piedra, the stone door. And every time it was followed by warnings, please, sometimes just one word, over and over, don't. But that door existed. I had seen it with my own eyes, and something was behind it. I couldn't leave until I understood what she was trying to tell me, why she kept appearing to me, why the whispers knew my name, why that priest seemed more frightened of the truth than of death itself. So I went back. It was late afternoon when I returned to the monastery. The clouds had thickened again, darker now, hanging lower over the mountains. The entrance was just as I had left it, rusted, half open, sighing in the wind. Inside, the air was colder than before, heavier. The monastery didn't feel empty this time. It felt occupied. I moved quickly, retracing my steps through the long halls, past the decaying infirmary and prayer rooms. I brought a high-powered flashlight this time, and a digital recorder strapped to my chest. Not for proof. I wasn't trying to convince anyone anymore. I just needed to understand. When I reached the corridor with the stone door, the temperature dropped instantly. My breath fogged the beam of the flashlight. The door was still shut, the same strange indentation at the center, like a seal waiting to be broken. I raised the camera and took a single shot. The flash went off, and then a sound behind me. A whisper, soft, female. I turned. Nothing. Then again, this time clearer, a voice speaking in Spanish, low and urgent. Daniel, no abras. Don't open. The hairs on my neck stood up. The voice wasn't from behind the wall. It was right behind me, as if someone was inches from my ear. I turned the recorder on and placed it on the ground, pointed toward the stone. Then I stepped closer and placed my hand on the indentation in the center. It was warm, almost pulsing. I pulled my hand back like I'd touched a stove, heart racing. I looked around the corridor. No one, nothing, just ancient stone and thick shadows. I bent to pick up the recorder, but now it was playing back. Static first, then, he sees through you. You came from her blood. She tried, she failed. It's too late. You're the key now. I hit stop. The screen blinked twice, then died. Batteries full, yet the power was gone. I grabbed my camera, heart thudding against my ribs, and left. As I passed the infirmary hallway, something caught my eye. A movement. I swung the flashlight. A figure was standing in the room across from me. Tall, male, in a dark cassock, watching. I recognized him. Padre Miguel. I stepped into the room. "What are you doing here?" But he didn't answer. He just looked at me. Not angry, not surprised, almost mournful. He said, "I told you not to dig. Now it's listening." I stepped closer. "What is it?" His voice was almost a whisper. "It doesn't have a name, only a hunger." For what? For faith, for memory, for roots. It feeds on what binds us to the world, on the echoes of bloodlines, on guilt. He looked at me, eyes suddenly wet. Lucia tried to stop it, but she didn't realize it wasn't her door to close. "What do you mean?" His voice trembled. "You weren't sent here by accident. The mountain remembers your family. You carry it in your blood." Then he turned and walked into the shadows of the hallway behind him. I followed, but when I turned the corner, he was gone. Gone. No footsteps, no door creaks, nothing. Just a cold gust of wind down a corridor that should have been sealed for decades. Back at the house that night, I didn't bother with lights. The electricity flickered anyway. I sat in front of the fire, playing Lucia's recording over and over. Her voice was thin, barely audible now, like time was erasing it, or like something didn't want me to hear it. I stared into the flames, thinking of what Miguel said, about bloodlines, about echoes. I pulled out the last photo from the suitcase, the one I hadn't dared to examine closely. It showed a group of people in front of the monastery, nurses, soldiers, priests, and in the back, nearly faded with time, a man who looked just like my grandfather. Not similar, not coincidental, identical. I didn't sleep. I couldn't, because now I understood. I hadn't found this place. It had called me.
The next morning, I tore the house apart. There had to be more. More photos, more records, more anything that could explain why my grandfather, a man who died before I was born, was standing beside Lucia Ferrer in a photo taken in the 1930s, in a country my family never talked about. I went back into the hidden room behind the bookshelf. I pulled out every document from the suitcase, every letter, every torn page. Nothing mentioned a man named Harper. But as I sifted through one of Lucia's notebooks, I found a page pressed between two others, brittle and water-stained, with only a few lines legible. The foreign volunteer, William H. He speaks little Spanish, but his hands are steady. He looks at me like he remembers something I haven't lived yet. He says dreams don't belong to one time alone. I believe him. William H. My grandfather's name was William Henry Harper. I sat back on the floor, notebook in hand, trying to breathe through the rising fog in my mind. My family had always been quiet about the past. My father once mentioned that his dad had done some work in Europe during the war, but he never said where or what kind of work. It was one of those unspoken legacies, quietly buried with medals and regrets. Now I knew he had been here, in this house, in this village, and whatever he had done, it hadn't ended when he left. That night, I lit every candle I could find. I didn't want electricity. I didn't want anything modern between me and whatever was reaching out from the past. The fire burned low in the hearth as I reopened Lucia's journal. This time, I started from the beginning. She wrote like a woman at the edge of sanity, not frantic, but frayed, like something had slowly pulled at the threads of her soul until only memory was holding her together. She wrote about patients who disappeared during the night, about a sickness that spread without symptoms, about nuns who stood for hours facing the stone walls, whispering things no one could understand. And always, she returned to the door beneath the monastery. She called it La Boca de la Tierra, the mouth of the earth. It is not hell, but a place older than hell, a wound in the world, a mouth waiting for names it can swallow. One entry struck me like a slap across the face. He brought something with him, the American, William, a dream he couldn't escape. He said it started before he arrived, a voice calling to him from beneath water, from behind doors. I fear he belongs to it now. I fear I do too. I closed the book. The room was too quiet. Then I heard it, scratching. Not at the door, not on the roof, inside the walls. Scritch, scritch, scritch. I pressed my ear against the cold stone and held my breath. The scratching stopped. Then came the whisper. William, Daniel, both of you opened it. I stumbled back, heart racing, and the fire behind me went out. No wind, no sudden draft, just darkness. I lit a candle with trembling hands. The flame flickered violently for several seconds, then calmed. I turned slowly. The camera was on. I hadn't touched it. It was recording. The screen showed nothing but darkness until, frame by frame, the room brightened on its own. not from the candle, but from some internal light. The floor behind me grew warped, as if something beneath it was pressing upward, like a face against fabric. And in one frame, barely visible, was a hand, thin, wet, pale, reaching up through the stone floor. I slammed the camera shut and backed away, gripping the journal to my chest. I had to leave. I had to get out of this place, of this house, of this village. I didn't even make it to the front door, because someone was standing there. Not outside, inside. A woman, dressed in white. Her face calm, her eyes empty. Lucia. She didn't move, didn't speak, but I could feel her in my mind, like her presence was pressing against my thoughts, peeling them open one by one. Memories I didn't recognize surfaced, a room with tall arches, incense burning, a basin of blood, my grandfather standing at a stone altar, Lucia beside him, her hand on the seal. I blinked. She was gone, but her voice remained. You must finish what he began.
I didn't sleep. There was no point. The house no longer felt like a place I could rest. It felt like a waiting room, a space between two realities, one foot in memory, the other in something that no longer cared for time or boundaries. Lucia's final words rang in my ears. You must finish what he began. I didn't know what that meant, not exactly, but I knew where to go. The monastery, the stone door, the place that had been pulling me in since the moment I arrived. I packed what I thought I'd need: flashlight, recorder, camera, water, journal. I left everything else. I didn't think I'd be gone long, or maybe some part of me didn't expect to return at all. The sky was choked with clouds as I drove back up the mountain. Mist clung to the road like skin. The wind had picked up, bending the trees in slow, deliberate sways. Nothing moved on the mountain except me, and whatever waited below. I parked where I had before. The rusted side entrance was still ajar, like it had never closed, like it had been left open for me. Inside, the silence was suffocating. No birds, no wind, just stone and shadow. I moved through the monastery with practiced speed. I knew the way now, past the collapsed ceiling, through the infirmary wing, down the long corridor to the stone door. The pressure in the air changed the moment I saw it. It felt like walking into deep water. The stone surface shimmered faintly, as if reacting to me, or recognizing me. I stepped forward and, without hesitation, placed my palm in the circular seal. It moved. With a low, grinding groan, the door began to sink into the floor. Dust poured from the ceiling. The smell of old earth and decay hit me instantly, thick and wet. And behind the opening was only darkness. The passageway descended at a sharp angle, the stone steps slick with moisture. I counted each one as I went, more to keep my focus than for any practical reason. 20, 40, 60. At step 78, I stopped. There was no sound, not even from me. No echo of my steps, no breath. It was as if the space had devoured sound entirely. I switched on my recorder and let it run. Then I stepped deeper. The corridor opened into a vast, circular chamber. The walls were carved with symbols, some familiar, Christian, pagan, but others older, cruder, primitive yet deliberate. In the center stood a stone altar, and on it, an object wrapped in black cloth. I stepped closer, heart pounding. The cloth felt damp, alive. When I pulled it away, I found a mirror, oval, framed in rusted iron, cracked down the center. And in it, I didn't see myself. Not exactly. The reflection showed me standing before the altar, but my eyes were black, my face slack. Behind me stood Lucia, hands on my shoulders, her mouth moving but producing no sound. I turned, but the chamber was empty. Then the recorder crackled. The blood returns. The door opens both ways. You carry what he could not. Suddenly, the mirror cracked again, a second fracture splitting off the first. I stumbled back. The air grew thick. My skin tingled like it was about to peel. The chamber trembled. Something was waking up. From the walls, a sound emerged. Not a voice, not a growl, but something deeper, primal. The memory of pain given form. It vibrated through my bones. I looked around the chamber and saw the truth. This wasn't a crypt. This was a tomb. Not for a person, but for something older, something sealed. And I had just opened the door. I ran. I didn't remember climbing the stairs, didn't remember reaching the monastery gate. Only when I was back in the car, drenched in sweat, blood dripping from my nose, did I feel myself again. And even then, I wasn't whole. Something had followed me. Not physically, not yet, but I could feel it. In my thoughts, in my reflection, watching, waiting. It had waited for decades, maybe centuries. And now, it had a name again. Mine.
I don't know how I made it back to the village. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely grip the wheel. My thoughts were unraveling, fast, like a cassette tape pulled from its reel. I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting something to crawl out of the shadows in the back seat. But I wasn't afraid of being followed anymore. I was afraid, they said puxado de volta, because whatever I had awakened under that monastery wasn't content with being freed. It wanted to be bound to someone, and it had chosen me. When I reached the house, the front door was open. No wind, no sign of forced entry, just open. Inside, the fire was burning. I hadn't lit it. The recorder sat on the kitchen table, its red light blinking. I pressed play. No static this time, no whispering. Lucia's voice came through, clear and deliberate. He made a pact, your grandfather, not out of faith, out of fear. He sealed the door with part of himself, his name, his blood, his memories. But the seal broke when he died, and now it wants another to replace him. It waited, it watched, and when you came, it remembered. There was a long pause, then more faintly. But it doesn't want you dead, Danielle. It wants you willing. The recording stopped. I sat in silence, the sound of the fire crackling behind me. It all made sense now. The dreams I'd had since childhood, corridors, doors, voices I didn't understand. My grandfather's distant stares, the way my father never talked about him. The fact that I was drawn to this village without knowing why. I was the continuation of a promise, a chain, and I had one last chance to break it. I returned to the suitcase, the one with Lucia's belongings. I ripped out the lining and found something I'd overlooked, a bundle of letters, brittle and yellow with time. One was addressed simply, to the one who carries his name. Inside, written in faded ink, was Lucia's final confession. He tried to stop it, your grandfather, but the ritual had begun long before he arrived. The villagers, they were part of it, bound by silence, by survival.
The altar is not a prison, it's a contract. To break it, blood must be returned, not spilled, given. 3 offerings, 3 seals. She listed them. The name, freely surrendered. The memory, relived in full. The body, placed at the gate. It wasn't a death sentence. It was a choice. You didn't have to die to end the ritual, but you had to give yourself to it. Not with fear, not with resistance, with truth. I understood now why Lucia's ghost never harmed me. She wasn't there to stop me. She was there to help me finish it. I didn't sleep that night. At dawn, I took only what I needed. The letters, the journal, my grandfather's dog tag I found tucked in one of the old suit pockets, and the cracked mirror from the altar, now fully shattered. I drove back to the monastery, alone. The sky was dark as ink, though it was already morning. Inside, the silence was deeper than ever. No wind, no air, just the stone door, still open, still waiting. I descended one final time. When I reached the altar, I placed the 3 items. My name, written in my own blood on a scrap of paper, Daniel William Harper. My memory, recorded on tape, every word of what I'd seen, heard, remembered. And my body, placed at the gate. And I spoke. I give what was taken. I return what was borrowed. Let it end with me. The chamber trembled. The ground cracked beneath the altar. Light, impossibly bright, poured through the stone walls. Not white, but golden, ancient, like sunlight that had never touched this world. The mirror shattered completely, and for the first time, I heard nothing. No whispers, no footsteps, just silence. True silence. The kind that meant it was finally over. When I awoke, I was lying outside the monastery, on the gravel path. It was morning, real morning. The sky was blue for the first time since I'd arrived. The stone door was sealed. No seam, no crack, just smooth stone and moss. I returned to the village. No one asked me where I'd been. They simply nodded. And that was enough. I packed my things, left the keys under the stone, and drove away without looking back. But even now, weeks later, back in my apartment in Chicago, I sometimes feel it, the echo of the mountain in my chest, like a deep breath taken by something vast and then held, waiting, watching. But I no longer dream of doors. I dream of silence.
It's been 6 months since I left St. Fosque. Sometimes it feels like a dream, like those weeks in the village never really happened. Other times, I feel like I never actually left the mountain. Like part of me is still kneeling in that cold stone chamber, whispering a name that no longer belongs to me. I've tried to go back to my life. Sort of. I stopped working. The camera sits in a drawer now, untouched. I don't take pictures anymore. Not after what I saw in that mirror. My editor emailed a few times, asked about the project. I told him the files were corrupted, the trip a bust. He didn't push. There are days I go out and almost feel normal. I walk the lakefront. I sit in cafes. I listen to people complain about deadlines and parking. But even in the noise of the city, there's a kind of silence that follows me. It's not in my ears. It's in my bones. The kind that waits for you to be alone. About a month after I returned, I started hearing things. Not voices, not at first. Just sounds. Footsteps on hardwood when no one else was home. Doors clicking shut in the middle of the night. A faint hum in the walls like wind passing through a throat too deep to map. I told myself it was trauma, residual fear, the echo of an experience I hadn't fully processed. But then came the dreams again. I saw the monastery, cracked and crumbling, buried in ash. The stone door open once more. And through it, not darkness, but a mirror. A mirror with no reflection, just the room behind me. And in the corner, a woman in white, face turned away. Every time I move in the dream, she moves too. She never looks at me. Until last night. I woke up at 3:12. Again. It's always 3:12 now. The time the knock first came and sent Fusk. The time the door whispered my name. I sat up in bed and stared at the door to my hallway. It was closed, but the light beneath it flickered. Not the glow of a hallway bulb. Candlelight. And then, a knock. 3 slow, heavy thuds. Exactly like before. I didn't move. I didn't answer. I just sat there, heart frozen as the knock came again. And then, a voice. Not Lucia's this time. Mine. You left me there. Finish it. Let me in. I haven't opened the door. Not yet. But I know I will. Because the seal was never meant to be broken. Not by blood, not by memory, not by choice. It was meant to bind. And I was foolish enough to believe I could ever walk away. So if you're reading this, if you ever find yourself drawn to places that feel older than time, if you hear a knock in the night, don't answer it. And whatever you do, never speak your name aloud. Not near the stones, not in your dreams, not in front of a mirror. Because it's listening now. And once it remembers you, it never forgets.